Dr. John Randolph, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And we're going to be discussing your recent book on, it's called the Brain Health Book, Using the Power of Neuroscience to Improve Your Life. And that's a daunting task to take on because most of it, the brain is a very complex organ.
Yes, it is. No question about it.
And yet I believe this book is intended for a general audience. Do I have that right?
It is. It's really an attempt to translate the science, kind of the evidence base, to a general audience of folks who may or may not know much about neuroscience or neuropsychology, but who have developed an interest from talking with friends or hearing things in the media. So my goal really was to make this pretty user friendly.
Yeah.
Not only in terms of understanding what we know from the science is good for the brain, but also thinking about some tangible applied strategies that everybody can use to help build in some good brain healthy habits into day-to-day life.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's sort of a daunting task given that neuroscience in the last, 10 or 20 years has just exploded with a lot of new understanding and a lot more detail than we had before. So it's a lot. But I have to say, I think you succeeded. Your book is written in a very easy to read, conversational style with case examples from your own practice here and there. And let me encourage you to sprinkle any of those into our conversation here because the human brain seems to respond particularly well to story.
Well said, no question. So yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah. And what prompted you to write this particular book at this particular time?
So great question. As a neuropsychologist, I think a lot about the brain and how the brain is related to behavior. But as a colleague whimsically said, neuropsychologists tend to be deficit hunters. We kind of look for the cognitive problems, but we don't always think about the solutions and how we can, improve brain health. So this was an attempt to, really look at the science of how to make our brains work better and really focus on that side of the equation and not just the problems that people can experience. Also, a few years ago, I had done a deep dive into the science, and I had written and edited a volume for other colleagues that was a little bit more technical in nature. And I wanted to essentially translate what I had learned at that point in time to a general audience. And so that was really my goal here. And I guess I would also say that, most people want to understand how they can help their brains work better and might be a little confused about the information that they see in popular media, on TV. There's a lot of information about this topic. Not all of it is based in the science. A lot of it, in fact, is not. So I really always felt back on, what do the studies say and how can I, perhaps come up with some applications for the average person who wants to learn more.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really like about your book is you start off talking about how much hype there is out there being directed at the public and that there are a lot of myths and misunderstandings, and we'll probably spend a good deal of our time going through those, and you can use those as a springboard for for making some of the other points that you have to make about how we foster brain health. One of the first things that comes to mind is I see ads on TV. I'm not scared to mention the product, Prevagen, I think is the one. And that's going to improve our memory, they say. And I think it's based on some sea creature, right?
Jellyfish or something.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
some sea
I've heard the
creature.
same.
There's another one that it talks about blue-green algae and what that can do for you. And so we have this sort of notion that if we take, I mean, even if a blue-green algae has a better memory than I do. There's no reason to believe that me swallowing some of it is necessarily going to get to the right places and do the stuff that I would hope for.
Right, right. Yeah, there's this, multi-billion-dollar industry based on products that aren't necessarily reviewed by the FDA, that have, kind of dubious claims and support. So I actually address this topic in my book that we know that there really are a lot of these kinds of products out there that just don't have much science, but have a lot of marketing.
Right.
Maybe a few people that are providing testimonials about the product. But when we look at what matters the most to the brain, it's activities and decisions we make that are available to everyone, sorts of things that are free or inexpensive. These are the things that matter the most. I mentioned to the folks I work with that, if you're paying a lot of money for something that is purporting to improve your brain, you're probably going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
We really want to think about the things that are, again, freer and expensive and available to most people, that make the most difference.
Well, there, those companies out there are really exploiting very widespread fear, particularly of Alzheimer's, that older folks such as me, and I've been older for a while, uh, there are these fears that of Alzheimer's and dementia and so on, and so they're really playing to that, and they're telling us to do. We hear things like doing puzzles is a way to stave off Alzheimer's. I'm not so sure that that's true, is it?
Well, when we think about sort of intellectually engaging activities, these come in a lot of different categories. Doing puzzles, Sudoku, those would be sort of some kinds of things. There actually have been some studies specifically looking at crossword puzzles, and there's some evidence that doing those on a fairly regular basis can be, somewhat helpful.
Uh-huh.
But we like to think more broadly, kind of mental cross training as perhaps being a particularly good way to go in terms of stimulating the brain. So if you're really into puzzles, that's great, but it's better to also read and maybe to play a musical instrument, doing some photography or painting or woodworking. Going to a museum from time to time, which, unfortunately right now we can't really do, although there are lots of virtual museum tours you can do at, some of the world's best museums.
Yeah.
A combination of a few of these things we know tends to, improve brain health in any given moment and also significantly reduces our risk of developing dementia down the road. There's what we call a dose response effect between mentally engaging activity and the benefits for the brain. So if we think of a dose of a medication, if it's 10 milligrams of a medication and your doc says, well, you should probably take 20 milligrams, you might get twice the effect. And, it's somewhat similar in this regard that more mentally engaging activities tend to do more good things for the brain.
Yeah, probably more frequently, right? More frequent dosing is going to be better than a huge dose every once every year or 5 years.
Right, good way to put it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, there was one study from a few years ago from a great researcher, Michelle Carlson at Hopkins, that the title of the article was literally "Variety is the Spice of Life," and it was
Oh,
about this idea that when we do kind of add in different activities, each additional activity actually reduces our risk of memory problems by about 10%. So yeah, coming back to your point, it's not about that, really intense activity with
yeah.
one thing. It's really trying to be a little more broad.
Yeah, I sort of rest on that. Uh, that gives me hope, having been a professor, which by definition you're pretty intensely involved in teaching across a variety of theories and so on, and reading a lot of different books and going to conferences and being a podcaster and getting to speak to people like yourself. Uh, I'm getting a lot of stimulation, and I think that not just brain health but health in general seems to benefit from, as you say, a kind of cross training approach to life.
Yes, yes. And, I like to think about brain health in that form as well, that, if your brain health is stronger, your overall health is stronger. You
Mhm.
have better quality of life. It really is, in my mind, the elephant in the room when we speak of any aspect of health. Because if your brain is working more effectively, you make better decisions, you learn and remember information more effectively, you're more efficient, maybe a little quicker in processing new information. So I feel like I'm obviously biased, but I feel like it's a particularly critical topic when we think of any aspect of
Yeah,
health.
yeah. So your whole book is a very health, you can tell by the title, but it's a positive approach as opposed to, as you said at the beginning, focusing on the deficits. And so there's an optimistic feeling that we can improve our health if we do the right things. And that's something we hear about all the time, the importance of
Hmm.
exercise and so on. And you do go through some of the myths, and you touch on one of my favorites when I was teaching, is the oft heard saying that we only use 10% of our brain, which on the face of it, just I sort of thought, when I read that again in your book, I sort of thought, well, anybody who thinks that you only use 10% of your brain, they probably are only using 10% of their brain. Because on the face of it, it's just it's just too impossible, because we're still on the cutting edge of even trying to understand our brain and how it works, and there's so much yet to be discovered. So there can't possibly be a basis for that. I was curious enough about that preparing for this interview, I actually went online. I got curious and said, well, where the heck does that idea come from? Where did that
Mm.
first get mentioned? And believe it or not, I found on Wikipedia that question taken up. And believe it or not, according to one point of view, it may go back to William James, a distortion of something that he was saying, which had to do with, it was looking at different approaches to child rearing, and the idea that if you gave a child a really enriched growing up environment, that child would develop to turn out to be a superior person in many ways. And I think that's not a controversial thing at all, but it got distorted into where he was talking about you might be using 10% of your potential.
Mm,
That's not the same thing as 10% of your brain. I think we
right.
all feel like, well, we are probably performing maybe lower than our potential for one reason or another.
Yep.
So, so thank you for the gift of motivating me to look that up and
It's
stimulate my
interesting to hear
brain.
that history. Yeah,
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 yeah, I actually learned something, and I think that'll stick with me.
right.
Um,
And as you say, I mean, it is just this absurd idea that if we were truly using just 10% of our brains, if you did a neuroimaging scan, a brain MRI, there'd be this, massive dark area through, 90% of the brain. I mean, that's absurd. So unless there's been some sort of a very clear neurological injury of some sort that's caused the brain to change in negative ways, yeah, we all kind of use our whole brains all the time, just
yeah,
perhaps in
yeah,
different ways.
yeah. I wanted to go through some of the misconceptions that you listed, and we're already sort of touching on them in the course of speaking here. One was that quick fix supplements are effective. Well, that's a myth that they are
Mm.
effective. That unfortunately, the quick fix, the silver bullet that we all desire, isn't out there.
Right. Yeah. And I think about this not just in terms of supplements like what we were discussing, but also in terms of available medications for treatment of dementia, like
Yes.
dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. There are a few kind of first line medications that are used to treat dementia. For some people, they might help a little bit. Other people, they don't really do much for. But using your term, again, it's really not a silver bullet. We really don't have a medication that's available that does good things for memory or other aspects of our brain. And that in some ways makes sense when you consider how complex our brain is with, roughly 100 billion neurons, a trillion different connections across all of our
Yes.
neurons.
Yes.
For one pill to over time make these changes that we want to see as very dramatic and so on, it just doesn't feel realistic. That being said, it's remarkable that even though we're still looking for medications that will help with devastating conditions like dementia, we know there are things you can do today and tomorrow, like exercise,
Right.
which exerts a very, very profound effect on the brain.
Yeah.
We can go into those details, but there are 8 to 10 different sorts of things that exercise does for the brain and our cognitive skills over a fairly short period of time. So there are actually lots of things we can do that aren't necessarily pills we can take, but that we know really do affect brain health
Yeah.
quite positively.
Now, one of the myths that you speak to is that memory loss is a necessary part of aging. Um, what about that assertion is false?
Yeah, so many people will experience some mild cognitive changes over the years, and that's entirely normal. We're usually able to compensate for those lapses pretty effectively. Significant memory changes are actually pretty rare, especially until we get into our 80s and 90s. Some people have believed along the lines of what we're talking about, sort of a related myth that dementia or Alzheimer's disease is inevitable, which it absolutely is not.
Mhm.
Even folks in their 90s, still the majority of people in that decade do not have a form of dementia or other cognitive impairment. So we need to, I guess, just be realistic about what the brain can and can't do at different stages of life, while also understanding that we really don't experience significant decline for the most part. The other piece that's interesting is that there's a group of individuals in their 80s and beyond that have been studied at multiple locations that are called super agers.
Ah,
And it's a fascinating group of individuals. It's people that have memory skills that are comparable to memory skills of people that are about 30 years younger than they are.
wow.
And not only that, which is pretty remarkable in and of itself, but their brains also look like they are the brains of individuals in middle age. So there have been lots of interesting studies along these lines. There are a few groups here in Northwestern and Harvard. I think in Australia there's another group, and they've just kind of started digging into what is it about these people that helps them become these kind of super agers. And it may lead into some other discussion we can have, but a lot of it seems to relate to these people being very socially engaged.
Uh-huh.
These people will endorse having very positive relationships with other people. They tend to report having more extroversion, being more extroverted in general in day-to-day life. And also, when you take sort of a deep dive into their brains, some of them have donated their brains on autopsy, which is certainly a very noble contribution. They've found that they have more of a certain type of neuron that's called the von Economo neuron
Huh.
than other people. And von Economo neurons are generally only found in social species on the planet.
Oh,
Some dolphin varieties have von Economo neurons, some gorillas, chimpanzees, a few others. So there seems to be something about social activity that's particularly important here. At least that's one of the initial findings that these researchers have found out.
yeah, that's fascinating. Also, I think you observe that um, sometimes as people get older, other forms of memory come in. For example, everybody, I think, has the impression or knows that many older people start remembering things from their childhood, from long ago, and those memories coming in with sort of a clarity or
Mm.
almost like being in therapy, that suddenly you're remembering things from childhood, that you had not thought about in years and years.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of older adults who are having some cognitive issues, and the key finding is that recent information tends to fade very quickly, but those distant memories, especially in folks with milder forms of cognitive difficulties, still remain intact.
Yeah.
And I often hear from either the person I'm working with or their family members that, you know, he can remember things in high school great. It's just he forgot what he had for breakfast this morning. So there's that real distinction between these sort of well rehearsed memories from way back and more recent information that's harder to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in a men's group, and one of the guys in that group, and I've been in this group for decades now, is suffering cognitive impairment. And but the interesting, so he has big memory issues, and yet his core personality of being a very sweet, caring individual is super intact. I mean, he is really there for you when you're talking to him, and keenly interested in how life is going for you and so on. And to me, that's interesting to see that I know it's not always that way,
Mm.
but it's beautiful to see that part of him being intact while other parts are, fading.
Sure, sure. And the way the brain changes, sometimes those core aspects of our personality really are intact for a very long period, as somebody may show a downward slope with their memory or other thinking skills. So that
Yeah. Well, maybe we should talk about uh, so the positive things, because I know you want to do that. And you had an acronym in the book, CAPE, a CAPE model of brain health. And you list cognitive strategies, active engagement, prevention of cognitive problems, education about the brain. So why don't you step us through those, the first being cognitive strategies?
Sure, sure. So yeah, so basically, like you said, this is just an acronym that's sort of a quick reference to these four key domains of cognitive health. In terms of cognitive strategies, the C of the CAPE model, that refers to the types of strategies we can use day to day that are either external to us, what are called external strategies, like writing information down on a note or
Uh,
making a list, using a calendar, using a pillbox, or using auto pay for bills. All these kinds of strategies that we use that are some sort of an aid of some sort in our environment. Very important, often very straightforward, and low tech is just fine. It doesn't have to be anything real fancy, although that's okay too. This is contrasted with internal strategies, which are ones that we're sort of generating in the moment. This might be repeating important information to help us remember it better, putting information in some sort of a package, like an acronym like CAPE for the CAPE model,
yeah.
putting information in some other context that will be easier for us to remember it later. So those would be some examples of cognitive strategies. For the A of the CAPE model, activity engagement, this refers to three different types of activities that we can engage in day-to-day life. Again, ones that are available to everyone, free or inexpensive, that the science really backs. One is physical activity or exercise. Another is social activity, being engaged socially in different ways, and mental activity, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Those three I like to call the activity triad, to kind of bundle those together. And we know that individually and collectively, those are some of the best things we can do for brain health. So that would be the A of the model.
Yeah.
The P refers, oh,
Before you move on,
sure, sure.
it's interesting that there are external things that are developing that can help us. with memory issues. And I'm thinking in particular, I refer to my iPhone as a prosthetic for my brain.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to look something up, the name of a movie that I can't remember, or who
Mm.
starred in that movie, or even to dig up something about Henry James
Yeah.
and so on. So that's a powerful amplifier. And I think there are other ways that technology is providing useful aids. Some people might be concerned or argue that, well, if you're using a crutch, aren't you going to be losing some capacity? For example, most of us used to remember phone numbers,
Mm. Hmm.
important phone numbers. Now, um, I can't even tell you what my wife's cell phone number is because I just press a button.
Yep. Yep.
What about that trade-off? Aborigines who used to be able to recite, going back way back, their lineage with a lot of practice, right? A rehearsal. But
Right.
thinking out loud, maybe we are learning new things like how to use a cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this idea of cognitively offloading some of our tasks, like remembering a phone number, onto a phone so that we can focus on other sorts of things.
Mhm.
There's a lot of concern that we're, not as good at navigation with maps because we're reliant on GPS devices all the time, which, there may be some value to that. If you haven't taken out a map lately, geez, I took one out the other day, and it's harder to use,
Yeah,
compared to when we were using them all the time. But it's not necessarily a bad thing that we've done some of that offloading into our devices so that we can stay perhaps better organized, manage time more effectively. Like you, I am very reliant on my keep me on track with different things, and I find it as a great tool in my day-to-day life.
yeah.
So I don't necessarily see it as a negative, but we certainly don't remember certain types of information quite as well, perhaps, as we used to,
Sure.
for that reason.
And you talk about the map. I remember, I mean, the physical maps are dangerous in the car because you've got this huge piece of paper that you're unfolding and you're trying to look at tiny stuff. And hopefully you've got a mate or a friend beside you
Yeah,
who will go through
right.
some of that. Often as not, as a source of arguments as well. Hey, you're not looking at that right. I said over here.
We've all been there, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's no way I would go back to the pre-GPS thing. That's such a useful tool.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and it's interesting when you think about, technological developments. My understanding is that when the printing press came out, people were up in arms about this, that people were going to lose their intellectual skills because they were going to be, using this device here. And, there's kind of these developments throughout time that have really helped us advance, but there have always been, critics
Yeah.
of any technology.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Let's see. I stopped you mid-flow on the Cape. Where were we?
Yep. So the next part of the CAPE is the P, the prevention of cognitive problems, and this comes in a few different varieties. We can think about our diet as one example. People who eat more along the lines of a Mediterranean style diet tend to have better brain health in any given moment, and also have a much lower risk of developing dementia down the road. Um, so that would be, one type of strategy to prevent cognitive problems. Also, we can think about managing stress effectively, managing depression and anxiety, all of which can have differing effects on our cognitive skills, both our subjective experience of our cognitive skills and objectively, what we see on cognitive measures.
There's a lot of
Um,
so much information these days about meditation and mindfulness. Would
yes.
you see that as one of those preventative cognitive strategies?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, mindfulness is one of the close to the top of the list as far as stress management strategies, I think. And, we see this in the science as well, that mindfulness certainly helps us regulate our emotions more effectively. We also see some fairly significant changes in the brain in people who meditate frequently. Areas that become more dense with either new neurons or sort of supplementing existing neurons with new connections.
Now,
So
now
mindfulness meditation is great.
new neurons, it's, even though I've been following this stuff for some time, it's only just relatively recently that I'm really getting that there are new neurons. I mean, that used to not, would have been regarded as impossible, right?
Right, absolutely. If you went back into the maybe 1950s and you asked, world-renowned neurologist whether we could grow new neurons, they would say, "Ha, what are you talking about? That's hogwash." But at this point, we know that especially exercise is capable of generating new neurons, especially in the hippocampus, this memory critical structure in the brain. This is probably the most exciting development in neuroscience in the last 20 years, that we as humans can actually grow new neurons. We know that other areas of the brain besides the hippocampus can become larger as a function of exercise. They can become more dense as a function of mindfulness meditation, as we were discussing. So it's still a little bit unclear if we're actually growing new neurons in other areas or if those existing neurons are just getting sort of more fortified.
Huh.
But that idea of neurogenesis, there's definitely evidence that's very compelling in humans, especially in the hippocampus and especially related to exercise.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And
So yeah, we'll go on. Yeah,
yeah,
with the Cape model. And one other thing about prevention is managing concussions. We see this, in all levels of sports, from
oh, right.
kids all the way to pros. That when kids are going through, let's say, soccer leagues in the U.S. and the ball until they get to a certain age, and then when they get to that age, they can head the ball just a few times a week. So managing the risk of concussion in that form, as well as at the college and pro levels, let's say in football, where people are encouraged to sort of hit people in different ways than was the case in the past. Here at Dartmouth College, there's a really interesting kind of engineered football dummy that they've created that helps the football players practice good tackling techniques without risking some sort of a concussion or head injury while they're practicing.
Yeah,
So I think that would fall also into the category of potentially preventing cognitive problems.
right, right.
Um, And then that last piece is education, the E of the Cape model, and that's sort of what we're doing now. Talking about the brain, how it works, how we all experience lapses in memory and other skills from time to time. That's okay. That's totally normal. And helping perhaps correct some of the myths that people might have
Yeah,
related to the brain, like what we were talking about earlier.
yeah, yeah. I think about psychotherapy, and we now realize that psychotherapy affects the brain. It can even
Yes.
affect physical structures in the brain, so
Mm.
that we used to think of it as being just so far removed from a chemical intervention as a way of influencing the brain, but
Mm.
it turns out talk therapy and also what we would call psychoeducation, that uh, uh, there are people who are doing trying to remember the term. The idea is a sort of brain a brain wise approach to psychotherapy. I'm blocking on the name, but as I began to look into it more closely, what I saw was that a lot of it was just psychoeducational. That is, helping a person understand how their brain is working, and that relieving what may have been an area of self blame, self condemnation, self rejection, oh, I'm moral, I have a moral deficit here because of such and such. Well, no, it's got more to do with an issue with your brain, and it may be an issue of how you talk to yourself and what you tell yourself about yourself. So I
Mm.
think there's an interesting uh, connection here about the education of the about the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and well said. And your other point about psychotherapy affecting the brain, that's a really good thing to bring up. We know that psychotherapy has very significant biological effects, ones that are just as powerful as, for example, antidepressant medication.
Yeah.
When you look at the mechanisms of what's happening in the brain with, let's say, maybe a CBT or an interpersonal psychotherapy relative to, say, an antidepressant medication, the mechanisms may differ, but you see equally pronounced brain related changes both before and after a trial of psychotherapy. So, this in some ways relates to other things that we're talking about that, activities, behaviors that we engage in really do have biological effects on the brain, and there's no question about it. And that's why I think neuroscience is a very powerful ally in helping us understand the effects of these day-to-day activities, or psychotherapy for that matter, on the brain. It's in a
Hmm.
way sort of helping validate these psychosocial types of strategies and interventions, in a very compelling way.
Yeah. What about the impact of genetics? Um, 'Cause certainly genetics got to be interacting with our brain somehow. What do you have to say about genetics?
Yeah, so we can kind of go in a few directions there. One of the particularly interesting things that I talk a little bit about in the book is that there's this risk factor for dementia. It's of the ApoE4 allele, and if somebody is ApoE4 positive, that means that they have an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. This has been established for some time. We know that that's the case. And so that is something we need to be mindful of. However, if you are an ApoE4 carrier and you are very physically fit and very physically active, you may actually experience more cognitive benefits than somebody who is not ApoE4 positive. So that genetic risk factor actually may be a plasticity gene of sorts. It's kind of if you use it or lose it. If you sort of are active and engaged physically, having that genetic mechanism can actually be more beneficial for you. But if you're sedentary, then you may actually experience more negative effects from a cognitive standpoint. So this is what I like about the genetic piece, is that the plot starts to thicken when you kind of introduce a few different pieces to the puzzle. So that would be just one example.
Yeah, you're getting into this area of epigenetics, right?
Yes, right.
Where the external environment, the things that we do, activities and so on, may trigger a genetic predisposition or suppress it.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, and it's such an exciting area, I guess, of broader science right now is epigenetics.
Yeah, and it
Um,
frees us up from the sense of predestination that it's all written in the genes and we don't have any choice.
Yeah, and that brings up another great point, which is, we do have choice and we do have a certain amount of control over our brain health. And that this is another sort of idea that people sometimes have, that my brain is going to age and change and I have no control over that. But we really know that that's not the case. When people are engaging in more activities in day-to-day life, social, mental, physical activities, and other sorts of things, that can really affect the trajectory of how your cognitive aging occurs over time. So we actually do have a fair amount of control over that process. And I think that's a very empowering idea for many
Yeah,
people.
yeah. And you mentioned in passing plasticity, and I know you've got a section in the book on plasticity and cognitive reserve. And we've sort of been talking around those two, but spell it out a little bit for us.
Sure, sure. So plasticity or neuroplasticity just refers to the idea that the brain is capable of changing over the course of time, especially in relation to some sort of activity. So, exercise, for example, is a great way to kind of rewire your brain, that we really can mold and shape our brain in different ways when we become more physically fit. So it's that idea that the brain is not set in stone. Again, if we go back to the famous neurologist back in the 50s who might have said the brain is not capable of change, we don't grow new neurons, we can now say, hey, guess what? There are a lot of things that we can do that will shape the brain over time.
And
And
also that we can sort of rewire, if you will, the existing connections without needing to grow new nerves. But as we engage in certain kinds of activities, the, some connections will presumably weaken and other pathways will grow stronger.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we see this, at a general level. We also see this in some individuals who have neurological conditions. So I've done some research on individuals with multiple sclerosis, and we've found exactly this: that when one part of the brain becomes damaged, other parts of the brain sort of rally their troops and
Yeah.
contribute to whatever that ability might be. So yes, we see that plasticity is very profound, in many people.
Yeah. And then cognitive reserve. That's what I was referring to as being a professor and having a lot of, I'm counting on having cognitive reserve, but tell us about that, what that is.
Sure, sure. So cognitive reserve really refers to this idea that experiences that we have in life sort of set up this buffer against negative cognitive changes down the road. And we can kind of parse that idea apart a little bit in terms of what we can call passive cognitive reserve, which is, for example, something that you did many years ago, like go to college and get an education in that form, or any form of education. That actually still tends to correlate with our cognitive skills many years later, even though we haven't been in college or high school or what have you in a long time. The other type of cognitive reserve is active cognitive reserve or dynamic cognitive reserve. In other words, what we're doing at any one point in time that can help our brain work better. And as I like to say, I teach a course on on brain health in the community, a community course. And I like to say to my participants, this is a course in active cognitive reserve because you're learning new things about the brain, you're stretching the brain, and you're also helping protect your brain for any changes you might experience down the road. So I think cognitive reserve is a very important concept as we try to understand why it is that some people tend to age in a better way cognitively than others do.
This is making me wonder about reading. Um, I would think that should have some kind of positive effect on the brain. If physical exercise or learning to play an instrument can affect the brain and as a major source of stimulation, what about reading?
Yep, reading is really one of the best activities we can engage in. There's no question. Some studies have looked primarily at reading as a real brain healthy activity. Others have looked at reading in the context of some other activities. But there's a lot that the brain is doing when we're reading, not just the visual aspect of it, but obviously learning and remembering new things, thinking about ideas more hypothetically. It's sort of a higher 40,000 foot perspective. So it's really, if there's one brain-related activity to engage in, that's probably the best one. But again, coming back to what we talked about earlier, that kind of mental cross-training is important too. So if you read, a novel a day, well, that's great. That's doing good things for your brain. But if you also play the trumpet or do some painting or go to a museum, and again, maybe a virtual museum at this point, that's a little better when you sort of have a few things in the mix.
Yeah. You know, we were talking about no magic bullet. I had an experience, though, just recently of being put on prednisone for some kind of chronic itch that I developed kind of all over my body. And it was, the doctor kind of said, well, we'll put you on a crash course here of to help you get through this. And so I put me on a 10-day prednisone regimen where you start off at a certain level and then they wean you off, taking
Mm,
less and less. For me, that had an incredible effect on my brain and mental life that I wasn't prepared for. My ability to focus and pay attention and energy just skyrocketed. And
mm,
right around that, I was taking an online course on poetry,
mm,
and I started writing poetry like crazy.
mm.
And so as I talked to the doctor about it recently, he said, well, you're lucky. Some people get terribly depressed and go to very dark places. And but I realized at one point I was verging on mania. And
Mm,
I think manic depression there is a thread of that in my family history.
mm,
So I realized at one point in that I was getting higher and higher, and I realized, whoa, I got to rein this in a little bit here.
mm.
Uh, but I found myself saying, oh, boy, I'd like to get more of this.
Pretty
But
desirable state, it sounds
yeah,
like.
yeah, it's such a desirable state. And so and I guess it kind of plugs us into that whole area of psychotropic substances can really have an impact on our brain and our experience. That's kind of taking us off into a different direction, I guess. But
Well, and I guess one sort of piece of that is positive mood, how that affects your brain. It sounds like you were in a positive state, perhaps again maybe on that road toward mania. Fortunately, didn't go quite that far. But when we are in a positive state of mind, our brain works better. When we're socially active
yeah,
and sort of invigorated by our connections with other people, we tend to be able to focus more effectively. We're better at problem solving and organization. If we're doing something that's mentally stimulating, that's really jazzing us up, we're having a lot of fun with it, other aspects of our life tend to improve as well. So I think a lot of brain health is related to our mood state that may just become sort of, kind of innervated because of, what we're doing with a certain activity. Your case was more of the prednisone kind of the side effects perhaps, but I think generally speaking, anything we can do that gets us into that more positive state, that's sort of a brain healthy activity is always a great way
yeah.
to go.
And I guess doing it naturally is a good thing. There are
Yeah.
um, my own experience with psychedelics and so on is it seems like there's in my experience, there's always been a price to be paid later. And
Mm,
if through artificial stimulation by a chemical, you can get your mood really high and a lot of energy going, it seems like there's always a down, the other side of the mountain is the downslope.
right. And yeah, I mean, well said. I think we're really thinking of, yeah, what are the natural activities, the things that might involve exercise or managing stress effectively to get us to that positive emotional state, being more socially connected, intellectually engaged, sleeping well. I talk in my book about the importance of sleep, and
Yeah,
sleep can absolutely affect our mood, good, bad, and otherwise as well. But anything that's going to get us to that better emotional state in a natural form is certainly going to be positive for the brain.
well, right now we're going through this pandemic with COVID-19. And one of the things that that's been running through this conversation is the importance of social interaction and
Mm.
social stimulation. And so it feels like we're at a place of deficit in terms of being able to fully nurture that very important part of who we are. And I'd like to get your thoughts about that and any observations you have about this period of time that we're going through and how you're dealing with it personally.
Yeah. Yeah, it is such a challenging time to be alive and participating in society, or to be sort of removed from society in so many ways. We are social creatures, and to be deprived of that regular social interaction, it's very challenging. We know that when we feel more socially isolated, that's not only stressful, but it can cause release of the stress hormone cortisol, which can affect the brain in negative ways. Usually, those effects are reversible when we feel less stress, when we feel more social connection. But it is such a tough time for everyone on the planet. I think everyone is probably somewhere on the continuum of mild to severe stress right now
Right.
because of what we're going through.
I think of the
Um,
importance of touch and the fact that I can't hug my adult children. I can't hug my grandchildren, and not just me, but lots of people are going through that. And at one level, I'm angry at the people who are not sheltering in, who are not listening to the best scientific advice that we have.
mm,
And on the other hand, I can understand, particularly with young people, that hunger for social interaction and stimulation and so on.
yeah.
So we're in a weird place.
We are in a weird place. And, we can only do so much socially, but it's important to do those things. If it's, doing Zoom calls with friends or family members, or phone calls, or texting, or email. We do have a lot of ways to connect with each other at this point in time, which is positive when we can't physically be present with many people. The sort of the social distancing piece, I think, is very important, and it's really a physical distancing. It's not necessarily a social distancing. We don't want to be closer than 6 feet to someone else, but it doesn't mean that we can't socialize with people. Again, in a variety of forms. So I think that's a very important point, that there are lots of ways that we can socialize in a safe form, even though we can't physically hug people and so on like we used
Yeah.
to. I would say, in terms of my own experience, I have, certainly tried to tap into things like exercise more, just to kind of keep myself healthier. Certainly, in the event that I get infected myself, I mean, everyone is certainly at risk. Trying to be more, socially engaged with my family, people that I'm close to. Trying to stay mentally stimulated as a way to, reduce stress, distract myself from all of the things that are going on in the world that are so challenging. But there's no magic solution. I think everybody is struggling in his
Yeah.
or her own way right now.
Well, I want to thank you for stimulating my brain with the tool of Zoom,
Yes,
uh,
yes.
and for sharing your expertise with me and with my audience. Is there anything more that maybe we didn't touch on that you'd like to add?
I think we hit on a lot of great points. Maybe one other thing to add is that, I think anybody can help build their brain to a better space, and it's all about taking small steps in that direction. If somebody wants to exercise more, it might be taking a couple, 5-minute walks per day at the outset, to not overdo it, but just to take a few steps in that direction. That anyone is capable of, improving their brain health, especially sort of in smaller increments.
Yeah. Well, Dr. John Randolph, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.